back with another eventless week in jiu-jitsu.
What are you talking about? There's all the competitions, all the gyms being open. It's a flourishing scene at the moment.
I actually think my favourite thing that's happened this week in jiu-jitsu is I tagged him the other day. Your favourite topic of conversation, actually. Craig Jones did a bit of a photoshopped version of him training with the guys from that 70s show.
That was absolutely brilliant. I think for anyone who's not seen it, head over to Craig Jones's Instagram page, and for anyone who's watching this, I'll try and dig up the picture. But that's the image for anyone who is watching. Craig, it's brilliant. Like when I saw it, I was like, yes. The caption though as well, like 12 months since Ashton Kutcher beat me up, and no, I won't say the unwashed rash guard. Like, A, you probably will sell an unwashed rash guard, and B, there was no beating up involved.
Yeah, I think Craig Jones's like fans only page has got to be pretty savage. Somebody would pay good money for that rash guard, I'm sure. And if he throws in a pair of leopard print speedos as well to go along with it.
Oh yeah, like I just love the way that Craig Jones sort of shamelessly takes the mick out of himself.
His Instagram page is great. He's got one of the most shameless Instagram pages going. Like some of his adverts or promotions of like products that he associates with are hilarious.
And it's not just sorry.
Go on.
Well, I'm saying it's not just him sort of stood there posing, going, "Here's my CBD code." It's actually like you'll go out. What was the video he did like a couple of weeks ago where it's sort of like he's in his kitchen and he's just naked selling his DVD?
Yeah, I mean, most of the time it's usually attached to a picture of his arse being out as well. Aside from Craig Jones's arse being all over Instagram, like Instagram and YouTube has got so much good stuff for the jiu-jitsu community at the moment without like much else going on. There's loads of hot topic for conversation, and like even though there's not a lot going on over here or even in the US for that matter, I think everyone's bored and wants more to do with jiu-jitsu. So like it's bringing up good topics of conversation like we've had over the past 12 months.
Yeah,
and, there's loads out there, isn't there?
Oh, there's loads. Like I think a lot of people are missing out on the fact that it's a prime learning opportunity. There are those out there that have been fortunate enough to create like a home gym where they can have a support bubble and be training within that. But at the same time, the studying aspect of the sport is still available. And sure, like we found, like when we were doing a lot more of the match analysis stuff, it keeps your brain ticking. And on the occasion that you can get into train, it doesn't feel as alien as it would if it just taken 12 months now, completely off.
It's such a sport of like what's going on in your mind. Actually, if you can just keep your mind fresh and flexible with it, like you say, it doesn't feel like you've had a lot of time off. Because no. I remember being told early on when I started training MMA and jiu-jitsu, Matt Thorpe, my coach, when I first started training, was like, if you're not going away and thinking about jiu-jitsu or MMA outside of the session and coming back in with ideas and questions, like your rate of development is going to be slow.
Yeah.
And I'd learned that lesson before. Like you've always got to get a good tutor. You've got to get a good tutor that can teach you a good lesson in whatever subject it is. But like a key thing about development like that is like, and it works for what we've been doing now as well, is thinking about it away from the training sessions. It's not, the learning isn't 100% going to happen in the session. You've got to go out and find it.
Like not only that, like you're saying, like a good tutor, like they raise as many questions as they will answer. So they may answer like a specific trouble or issue during a class, but then that answer there should also spark the intrigue of, okay, so what if this happens? Like, what can I do there? And then you can be like, well, you've got your own time now to either speak with your coach and training partners about this and try and figure it out, or go away, study it online and sort of get onto the forums and ask questions and bounce ideas around, then come back to the class next time and try it out, drill it. Like I'm sure there's a lot of people out there, like I'm pretty sure me and you done it, where you sort of like, you lay there in bed at night after training or something, you go over a sequence where you're going, right, this should have worked differently. What could I have done differently? And then it clicks. You come back the next day, you try it on a training pattern, sort of like a drilling sort of sense. And then you start to land it in rolling because you're familiar with the situation, but you've just tweaked like the mechanics of a certain issue that you might have been having, and it's just fixed it, just almost from obsessing at it at night.
Yeah, and it's usually when you've been smashed, like is usually the time when you got to think about those sort of stuff. But we probably should get somebody on who knows more what they're talking about this. But essentially, I was watching, I was either listening to a podcast or watching a podcast one time about this, and they were talking about exactly what you're just going on about now. And essentially, if you've got that in your brain before you go to bed, when you're going to sleep, your brain works at like 10 times the speed of what it does to recompute the problem. So it's actually like putting your brain into high processing mode while you're sleeping, and then being able to figure out the problem in your subconscious, and then you can come back and reapply it.
Well, that just sort of reaffirms the importance of sleep and recovery as well. Like everybody of this, I don't know, actually, there's a lot of more people now clued up on the sleep, but there certainly is a sort of martyrdom of lack of sleep at the moment. Slowly is phasing out, I'm noticing, but being able to function on 5 or 6 hours sleep isn't a great thing. Like me personally, pardon?
It's probably not optimal.
Yeah, and you're not gonna be well rested, and you're not gonna be thinking clearly when it does come to the challenging times. Whereas if you just go to bed an hour early and get up an hour later, or go to bed early in general and get your 8 hours or whatever you find that's best for you, and you're going to resolve the problem solving side of things a lot easier. You're going to recover much better, and it's not easy because there's other things that can affect sleep, like even just being the wrong temperature. Like you can have a restless night, but like it should be a bigger focus on a lot of people's training routines, the sleep side of things.
Yeah, I think that, like we said before, we've had a whole podcast about this, haven't we? That sleep's kind of like the last piece of the puzzle that falls into place. You've got to get your nutrition right first. You've got to make sure that you're exercising properly so that your body's being used properly. You've got to keep your mind sharp and make sure that you're staying on the ball with keeping your interests going as well. Because like not only, you can be physically tired from the day, but your mind needs to feel like it's had a mental challenge as well.
Yeah.
And I always find for me, like I only ever get my sleep to fall into place if all those boxes are ticked. It's like the most important one that you need to get right, but there's a lot of things that you need to do to get in place before it'll actually click into place.
Yeah. And like I said, like it's the last piece of the puzzle for like what I'd say like the foundations. And then once you've got the foundations in place, that's when you can be a bit more selective and a bit more precise with things. But it's like building a house on a bad foundation. Eventually, it's just going to collapse, in it.
Yeah. I mean, going back to that, like improvement of like increasing your potential for development. Like I know Matt was saying what Matt said to me about going away and thinking about it while you're not in the session and coming back with questions. I often think that as a student, the best thing that you can come to the session with is a question.
Yeah.
Like whether that's a question that you ask the instructor or that you try and figure out yourself with your training partners. So it might be like, well, what if? Like, what if's always the best question to ask. And it's like, what if I put my arm here? Or what if I twist their arm this way? Or grab the gi here? Or whatever. Like, always a what if is a great question to be asking.
Yeah.
And the best answer you can get if you ask your coach is depends. I love to give the answer, it depends. Because it's never a one answer, is it? And it always sounds like a cop-out, but it's true. It always depends. There's so many variables that the question, what if, is the most appropriate question, and the answer, it depends, is the most appropriate answer.
Like the funny thing as well is like the sheer look of like disappointment when you actually answer, and the sort of like, what? There's not a one button like one pill fixes all things. Like, no. it's all a big depends, because you can put your arm there, and if they don't take the post away, it might work. If they do take the post away, you've got another problem there, and then it just snow. It's like what's like a tree, the tree branch, or like a river sort of splitting. There's always going to split in two, then that splits in two, then that splits in two. It's a endless quest for options.
Did you get any tips early on with that sort of stuff that helped you out?
Yeah, so early on it was like the thing I got told was position first. So stop rushing to find a submission. Like, the submissions will come, but they're going to come much easier once you can control a position. Like the whole question thing, there's no such thing as a stupid question, because you don't know it if you don't know it. And you'd have to be a bit, I don't know what the word would be, but to sort of dismiss someone's question because they don't know the answer to something is almost kind of belittling to the question asker.
I'm not going to say like this is an example of the only time where I'd say there is a stupid question, but how many times have you seen in a class that you've been in or you've been teaching, and there's always one guy that does it, and I know the guy who does it at my gym is, I'm not going to shame him, but he knows who he is if he's listening. The instructor will be showing a technique, and before the technique's even being demonstrated, and you've had a chance to go away and drill it, they're like, oh, what if I sweep him here? Or what if he does this? Or what if he defends? So like, go away and practice the technique first. And then if you find it to actually be a problem, then ask the question. Because you're just asking it for the sake of asking it.
That's it. So it's not a bad question. It's just poorly timed.
Yeah.
Yeah. There are such things as poorly timed questions.
So it might be perfectly appropriate, just not right now. Go and practice it first and try it and come back. And then you're probably going to answer your own question, because you're going to go away and practice the technique and then find, oh, actually, it was irrelevant, or I was perfectly right. And then you can bring your instructor over just for a pat on the back and like, well done, you were right with the right answer, rather than just trying to show everybody else in the class that you know what you're talking about.
Like I said, because they are valid questions sometimes, but you've got to, with some things, you've almost got to be on the receiving end of the technique to be like, oh, that is why.
Yeah, and that's the what if.
Yeah. And then also, like, give your coach a benefit of the doubt. Sometimes they may be building up to that question with the technique. There's no point trying to answer everything with the initial foundation building of a new subject.
Yeah.
Like, that's why when we were doing the sort of side control videos, we were like, we're going to make sure that we can give everybody good foundations to work with before we start going and to here's the attacks. It's sort of, can you hold them down? Yeah. So there's no point sort of being like, oh yeah, well, if I do this sweep and they post here, post there, post there, like what happens? It's like, well, let's get the basic version done first, and then there's going to be another 2 or 3 options that we're going to look at, which will answer various questions. And then we might go into further detail on the next session, which will go into other details. It's like the only example I can think of for now for that is sort of like the butterfly sweep, you know, the over under. And like, it's always like, here's the basic one. And it's like, well, what if you can't get underneath them, or what if they're getting their arms free? It's like, well, we've got an answer for that. That's going to be the next technique. Oh, okay. So you can't get an over under. Well, let's go to here to set something up to then get the sweep that we wanted. All right, yeah, that makes sense now. And then sort of building on that.
Yeah, it's oftentimes the answer is that's the next technique that we're doing. So just go and do the one that we're drilling now, the foundation. We'll come back and do that in a minute. That being said, though, that answer isn't as bad as the one that pisses people off most of the time, which is, how do you defend a triangle? Don't get caught in a triangle.
Like, from experience, what I found, submissions like the triangle you need to recognize the early signals and put in preventative action for things like the triangle. Arm bars and things like Kimura, well, depends on where the Kimura is, I'll say. But there's certain submissions where you can be like, this is my last ditch, hitting the red button, emergency exit. Triangles, if you've let somebody cinch their legs up and get there without an ease of a fight, or if they are very leg length gifted and they can just sort of triangle you from the corner of the room, you need to put in preventative measures.
Yeah, unless they're going to pull a Genki pseudo flying triangle on you.
Do you know what? I've actually been caught with one of those in a comp.
It's quality, isn't it?
No, not when you're on the receiving end.
But like usually, like when your coach is saying don't get caught in it means like you've probably fucked up 10 things before it got to that point.
Yeah.
So trace your steps back and figure out what the first thing that you did wrong was, because tapping's probably the first thing that you did right. If it gets to the point where you're in the triangle and you're about to go out, nothing's coming out of that. And that applies for any submission, to be honest.
And there is
to go back to what you said, position over submission.
Yeah, 100%. And like there is one of the lads that train at Hive. He uses, I'm not going to name it, like name him, but you'll know who he is if he's listening. He likes to use a triangle to set up a pass. So he'll almost sort of bait you into it and go for the pass that way. I think you know who I'm talking about, don't you?
Yeah, that's it's a risky business, isn't it? You
It
put
is.
a lot of faith in the person having a shit triangle.
To be fair, I've seen him land it on people with decent triangles now as well.
Yeah.
And he seems to have the timing quite right.
That's just coercion, though, isn't it? You know,
yeah.
He knows what he wants to sell with it, and it's not. You know, I'd almost argue that that's a different scenario from how do I escape a triangle, because he's anticipating it with that.
But yeah, if that's your like, you're gonna get, if that is your want to be your passing style, you're gonna get caught in a lot of triangles in the build up to learning how to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, but usually that's the way it goes, isn't it? You have a load of triangles snapped on, you're like, fuck this, I've got to find the fucking pass for this.
But speaking of the details of improvement, you mentioned it earlier, and we watched it sort of pre-recording. Was that John Thomas BJJ? There's a clip that's been floating around.
Yeah, I've seen a couple posted up. Cam posted one up earlier in the week, and you know, it's kind of talking about stuff that we've talked about before. And probably worthwhile going over again. Kind of already touched on it a little bit today, haven't we? But do you reckon we can get away with playing the clip and having a chat about it? Yeah,
we should be all right playing the clip, because the one that we sort of looked at and wanted to talk about was the detail to improve fast in jiu-jitsu. So we'll play the clip.
So for anybody who wants to go and check it out first, what's the name of the page?
Oh yeah, the name of the page is John Thomas BJJ, and that's JONTHOMAS BJJ. First time I've heard about him, to be honest. Seen the clip, but he has some very good content on there. And his video, Key Details to Improve Fast in Jiu-Jitsu, it's basically what we've discussed already, with just a few different tweaks on it. But yeah, for anyone's listening, here's a clip, and anyone who's watching, here's a clip.
Most important thing you can do beyond the technique, beyond everything else, if you want to get really good at this sport, is probably find your one or two core training partners that you can build off, that you can always be doing specific training and test ideas and stuff. Because if your only format of training is just going to the normal class, doing the drills that the coach shows, and then maybe watching a video, and then only going to class, you're never going to get to where you want to be. You have to have private time to work on things. And the key thing with that is finding a key person that you can work with. And that means calling people, messaging people, talking to people after class, but put that work in, it's going to pay off. That's what's going to get you to the next level 100%. So
that's John Thomas, BJJ, that. Pretty valid point, and I'm pretty sure it's not something I started doing until I was around blue belt, because usually after class as a white belt, I just wanted to get home because I was that beat up, and also when I first started training, it was getting very close to the last bus home, so I wasn't hanging around.
I'd make that same argument and expand on it. This point almost becomes more applicable the higher up the levels you get.
Yeah.
So like, obviously, as a complete beginner, you don't know what you necessarily need to work on. You can certainly spend more time outside of the class drilling the stuff that you've been showed by your instructor. There is a higher percentage or probability that you could potentially be drilling a bad habit really early on. So just making sure that you've got those more knowledgeable eyes on you when you're doing something, so you're not forming a bad habit, is a good idea. But certainly the deeper you get into it, so like blue belt, purple belt, and beyond, like, you need those core training partners, I think, because you gotta, like we talked about before, gyms usually will cultivate an environment where people are trying to play the same game, or there might even be a couple of guys in your gym that, like, let's say, want to get really good at leg locks, let's say, for example, and you've got those 3-4 guys that you might get lucky to have with you on the mats, that you can do the class, and then that can be your private drilling time afterwards. You guys just going back and forth on the new techniques that you want to learn, helping yourself go through those problems of what we were just talking about what if, and then experimenting with the different what ifs of the positions.
Oh, definitely. And to add to that as well, like, don't always feel like you have to roll during the rounds. Like, if you are wanting to work and develop an idea, doing that during the round time is very, very valid to do and very worthwhile, especially if you're feeling a little bit tender, like from a tough week's training and you're sort of needing a lighter night, or if you've got an external coach who sort of said to you, tonight, mate, just take it a little bit lighter. If you're going to roll 50%, this, that, and the other, use that time there rather than being like, oh, I'm just going to flow roll. Use it to develop ideas, because you can still do it at a high tempo. Drill, resisted drilling, then positional drilling, so you're trying to get to it from there, and then almost trying to tie it in with an already inbuilt sequence that you've got.
Yeah.
But also, if you are on the more inexperienced side of things, but you see the conversation going and it's with players that you enjoy rolling with, or you tend to learn a lot from, or you just want to learn more, get yourself almost, try and sort of involve yourself in those conversations on the mat afterwards. So you don't necessarily have to fully understand everything that's going on, but if you can take away a concept, or if you see them working on a submission that is new to you or you want to improve on, or is just a general weak spot on you, like, go and listen to the conversation, ask questions. Like, I know that I'm more than happy to answer questions when I'm discussing this kind of stuff. Sure, like, same with you, I'm sure, Bob. And it also helps further develop that idea when you get asked a question from an inexperienced eye, because there's a different perspective that you don't necessarily have when you're expecting certain movement patterns. Whereas if someone's less experienced than you, they're not ingrained into the norm or your norm. So it provides a great perspective for you to look at and almost have to address.
I think the unique thing about, like, this sport, and it is the same in a couple of other sports as well, but there's a lot of teaching that goes on the mats that isn't from the coach in the session. And a good thing about what you're just saying there as well, just to expand on that, is, like, let's say somebody who's a little bit less experienced in the technique comes into your training group and tries to learn that technique that you guys are working on. There's a lot that you might be taking for granted as the more experienced player, and not, as we both know, to teach somebody something, you've got to have a lot greater knowledge of the subject, much more in depth about why you're doing this, why you're doing that, because those are the questions that the less experienced player is going to have. So if you to actually take time to sit down and think about why am I doing this and why am I doing that, might unlock other potential ideas for developing the technique further. So don't discredit, like, helping somebody less experienced out, because it's definitely going to help you accelerate your learning. Whatever I've done, the way that I've got the best at it quicker is figuring out how I can teach it.
Yeah, no, definitely.
And that's no different on the mats. So don't, as that less experienced player as well, don't be afraid to just. It's kind of a difficult one, isn't it? Because as a less experienced player, if you're like a white belt coming into the gym and you're going up to, like, the brown belts or the purple belts, and they're being like, oh, can I dive in on this? You might be feeling like And it might be a little bit advanced from where you're at the moment. It might be applicable just not to come to that topic of conversation just yet, but like you might have a conversation off the back of it that gives you something to go away and work on to let you get to that point.
Yeah. No, definitely. But then there's also sort of, like, even if it is a bit advanced for you, just to sort of counter argue that a little bit, there could be some details in what they're discussing that could be taken away maybe as well. But obviously, if they're looking at something if it's your first week and they're looking at heel hook entries, yeah, it's going to be a bit out of your scope, and you'd probably best off learning those stuff from your coach initially to figure things out. But yeah, like, there's always details to take away from a conversation. And the questions that you ask are going to help further the other players' development as well. So yeah, I think it's definitely worth getting involved in them conversations. And
no, yeah, I wasn't saying like don't get involved with them. It was more of a case of like, I'm trying to think of a good example here. Heel hooks is a good example.
Yeah, heel hooks are good.
Going into a conversation with heel hooks with more advanced players, the thing that you're going to come out of that learning, if you don't necessarily learn how to do the heel hook, is what are the steps needed to get to that. Because the guys that are practicing the heel hooks are probably going to be practicing the like the last bit of the details, whereas these 4 or 5 steps that you're going to need to learn prior to getting into that position to get to the point where you're drilling it. So you're going to learn the entries to the legs, you're going to learn the pinching and controls, you're going to learn how to keep your legs safe, and you've got to learn all of that before you get to the point of like, okay, right now this is how I do the finish effectively.
Yeah.
So if you don't come away with the details on the finish on the submission, at least you've got 3 or 4 steps. Because I've done that before as well when people have come up and we've been practicing something a bit more advanced, and when we're drilling, just be like, okay, the best thing that you can do right now is just practice on getting into the leg entry and just drilling that. I don't even want, like, we're going to drill the finish, but I just literally want, the best thing that you can do right now for you is to practice getting into the position. So they're doing the same things that we are when we're doing the drilling, or the more advanced guys are doing when they're doing the drilling, but they're just not doing that last little bit, but they're getting lots of practice doing the most important thing.
No, definitely. Yeah, no, it's just a great point, that about the sort of taking the right details away that's relevant to you, isn't it?
Yeah.
Mine just went then. Do you know where you sort of have a point there, like there in your mind,
my
and
point
it just goes?
It was that good a point that it just overshadowed whatever you were going to talk about, clearly.
But yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. And also, that's what I was going to go on to. Also, as experienced players as well, if you see some less experienced players drilling something and it may be a bit out of their scope at the moment, or you see them doing it badly, like, the best thing you can do for yourself and your club is to go and speak to them, find out and iron out their bad habits, and also maybe point them in the direction of some good source of information. Because if they're doing it wrong and they're doing it badly, and if it is something like leg locks again, they're either going to potentially hurt themselves or others, create some really bad habits. So then when it comes to needing someone to defend leg locks against, you've narrowed your own pool of training partners.
Yeah.
Because if someone just can't get into the position, because there are players now that are very leg lock specific, or very upper body specific, or very control specific, and you're going to have the different types of players in your gym. So when you do have those opponents in competition, you're going to want to make sure you have the variety of training partners to improve on that aspect of things. So if you've got someone doing it badly in the gym, that's going to affect your personal development as well. So the best thing you can do as an experienced player is to impart as much knowledge as you can, and basically stop them making the same mistakes you made as well. And if they get better than you at something, fantastic, you've done your job. And then you can also use that time that you're training with them to then improve yourself.
That ties in perfectly to what I was just going to say as well, and it filters all the way from the top down. So the head coach in the gym, like your role as the head coach in the gym, I would make the argument is to make more coaches that can, because there's only one of you at the end of the day, isn't there? You might have like 50 students. If you can create a culture where the guys that you're bringing up and you brought up from white belt and, you know, the blue belts and the purple belts and brown belts, getting them to be good coaches as well to help out everybody else on the mat, it just drags the level of everybody up. And it makes it a lot easier for the head coach to know that, like, I know that Sai's doing a good job and he knows his techniques inside out, and I've got absolutely no issue with him telling the new white belt or the blue belt how the technique should be done, because I know that he knows how to do it properly. There's a problem where, like, you might not know the technique really well and you might be passing on a bad habit to somebody else. So, like, there should be a good relationship between you and your coach to know that they're okay with you telling other people in the gym. And that might even be a conversation that's worthwhile having with people at a certain stage as well.
Yeah, definitely.
You know, the culture of jiu-jitsu is that you're teaching people to teach. Like, people become coaches through the process of going through the belts.
Yeah, well, definitely. I think as well that the coach's role in that process is very important as well, because they can't almost scold someone for passing on wrong information. You've got to make sure you approach it right. So I think one thing that I do as a coach is, or when I can coach, is if someone's drilling something and they're giving not quite the right advice on it, I'll step in and sort of correct them, but correct in a way that highlights what they did right first, and then be like, but if you try it this way, you're going to get the result better. So it's not knocking them down, it's sort of being like, you're almost there, like, really impressed with this, good job, just try and tweak this. And then also, if someone's telling the right thing, like, I will happily go over and say, like, do you know what, perfect, that, mate, good job, great work. Because it's just reinforcing that they know what they know, and it's establishing the confidence in them and their knowledge. And I'll also, like, this is something that I've started doing a bit more, or started doing a bit more towards the end of when we actually could get together with classes, was putting people in threes. So it would almost be experienced, or two more experienced players with one less experienced player, so that everyone can learn something, and also the less experienced player can ask the questions, the more experienced players can answer the questions, but it also gives them three people to bounce ideas off. So then it's not just a two-way conversation between less experience and more experience, because then it can be a bit more favor towards the more experience because of that unwritten seniority there. Whereas if there's there's three of them there, they can bounce different ideas off, and then if they can't quite agree, then they'll call me over, and then we can all talk about it. And also, from what the things that we spoke about prior to, like, earlier as well, like last summer, was the shotgun trade. Was it shotgun? Top Gun. That.
I know you've been training.
I don't know why I think of that. But the Top Gun training. But having another set of eyes on you. So if they are doing a rolling round, you've got one person externally who essentially is the coach. And one thing that I always try and say to them is, you either split the time 2 minutes and 2 minutes, where you coach half and half. So you coach one person for one half of the round, and then the other person for the other half of the round, and then you can give feedback at the end of it. Or almost always pick the defender or always pick the attacker. So then both people are getting sort of the good amount of coaching. And like you say, that style of training, like, it seems to accelerate people a lot.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? And as well, what it does from the you know, it's not only the guys that are in the round rolling that are learning or getting the benefit of doing it. The guy who's sat out watching is like actively watching the match as well, rather than just being like, oh, cool, this is my rest round.
Yeah.
You're watching and you're learning because you are trying to improve your teammates. So you can do it. You can do it either way you want. Like you say, you could be like, right, this is your round. Like, Jerry, this is your round. Like, everything that goes on in this round is going to be directed to improving your coaching. John, your round's next, mate. But now the focus is on Jerry. And then, you know, you switch around and you come back, and then everyone gets their opportunity to make improvements. So you roll and attack, you roll and defend, and then you watch. And I always like to think about that watching as well. And it's like when you were just talking about coaching and having those outside eyes. Like, it's always easier to go third person mode and just see it from the outside. You might not necessarily know what's going on. Like, why can't I lock this triangle up? And you can't see what's going on because you've got the blinkers on and you're right in first person mode with it. And the person on the outside can simply just go, just move your hips like this. And then you're like, right, okay. Or like, oh, when Si was coaching it, he had his hand here and you've not got your hand there. So I just do that and right, it's working now.
Yeah. And with that as well, like, you've my mind keeps going. Sorry, mate. No, it's gone. I don't know what's going on with me this morning.
So we were talking about like having that third person on the outside to watch, and the benefit of like sitting out for the rounds and having that as an opportunity to like actively coach from the outside rather than just, fuck it, this is my rest round.
Yeah, like it also like helped. This is what I was trying to remember then was it helps develop to more of a passionate interest in the sport as well, because you're not watching it. You're not just sort of sat back watching the mat. You're intently watching it, and you start to appreciate more of the small details. So when you do go home, you're going to be more likely to watch other matches like that. So then you can start to break down and actually critically analyze the matches that you watch at home, or whether it's an MMA fight. You can start to critically break down what they're doing. And then that's when you sort of come away with little clips of that technique was quality. I want to learn how to do that. That hip toss was brilliant. That takedown, that armbar entry, that escape. Like, because there's been plenty of times where over the time that I've been with Hive is where someone's come in with a clip and been like, Si, how did they do this? And it's been like from the weekend UFC fight or from an event that was on floor grappling.
And it's like a technique in of itself, isn't it? You know, like breaking techniques down.
Yeah.
You know, you're learning how to do techniques in the gym and you're improving your ability to do that from what you're being shown and just kind of absorb that information. But learning how to teach is a skill as well. So, you know, you're watching the clips or you're watching the rounds on the mat and you're like, right, what's the important bit? Like, where's his hips? Right, I'm going to watch the hips. That's the most important thing on this one. Or what was it, the grips that were more important? And you go away and you can watch the videos and you can overlay that, and being able to then come back to the gym and articulate that to your training partners and explain your idea is probably one of the most difficult things to get right about teaching.
Yeah.
And probably one of the most important ones as well, because you might have a great idea in your head or have a really good understanding of something, but can you communicate it to somebody else?
And that's where the art of teaching comes in.
Yep.
And like you say, it's a technique and skill in itself. And the only way
the more you do it, the better you get at it.
Exactly that. But it's quite a in-depth subject, this, but like I think it's quite an important one that we've managed to cover today. But be interested to see what other people's thoughts are on this. Like, we've got that John Thomas's viewpoints on it, but if anybody else has got any sort of other comments or thoughts, like, drop them into the comments, drop us a message, or even if you've got any questions that you'd like us to address, or any clips or any public opinions or stuff of the sport that you think I agree or disagree with this, like, see what somebody else's thoughts are, send them in to us. Like,
that's a good one. Do you think anybody other than black belts should be teaching a class? Should purple belts or brown belts be teaching anything? Leave that one in the comments, because do you remember seeing that article where it was like I think it was from the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Federation in Brazil. They were like, no black belts teaching, nobody other than black belts teaching.
See, I think that's ridiculous because, like, everybody's got something to offer, and a lot of the time, some people's belt level could just replicate the amount of time they've been wearing the gi. But I know plenty of people who have trained for a long time and like beat a lot of black belts and know what they're good at and how to teach, who are blue, purple, brown belts, just because they've chose not to put the gi on as much.
Yeah, it's an interesting topic. It's
Yeah.
you know, I'd be screwed if it was only black belts teaching. I think the argument that they're probably making there in Brazil is like there's probably more black belts per capita or head that you could go to, if that makes sense. Like if you're in an area where there's a low amount of black belts, I think this is the point that the article was making when I was reading it. Like the point was there are that many black belts. Why are you going to go to a lower belt when there's hundreds of black belts in your area to go and train with?
But then at the same time, like it's just sort of promoting some sort of elitism there.
I'm not saying it's right. I think that's the article, the point that the article was trying to make.
Because like in the lower income areas in Brazil, not everyone can afford a gi, but there's going to be some very, very talented, possibly better than a lot of black belts that train in no gi. And just because they decided not to put a gi on and they've got so far without a gi, so they've decided to keep it off, they're not going to have the black belt.
I think it comes more down to what is your ability at coaching? How well can you teach? Because like if you've got, you can be a black belt with, you know, you might know how to do all these techniques, but can you remember what it feels like to be a white or a blue belt? And how does that person learn? Like, how are you going to communicate that idea? It's all well and good knowing how to do it, but being able to communicate how to get somebody who doesn't know how to do it is a completely different game. Oh,
definitely. I think they've got some different coaching practices and teaching practices over there, haven't they?
I tell you, he does a really good job of coaching when you watch his instructionals. Like, there's a lot of good people, but I like watching Gordon Ryan's instructionals. Like, he does a really good job of communicating what he's thinking, and then he's got those the tapes of him doing it in practice as well. And you know, he's definitely a product of John Danaher's coaching style as well, because you can kind of hear that the same phrasings and ideas coming across from when he goes into his coaching mode. Because definitely coaching mode probably.
But I do think he delivers the information in a more palatable way than John Danaher.
Yeah, and that's where that's all credit to being a good teacher. And you know, teacher might not be the first level that you associate Gordon Ryan with being, but he's obviously very well practiced at doing it.
I'd say I could think of a few other words for him. I'm sure a lot of other people can.
I'll leave that one to you, mate. People can stick that in the comments as well if they want.
But I'm not his biggest fan as a person, but as a grappler, you can't fault him.
No. And on that note,
hit us up at the Grapplers Academy on all the social medias, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, all your digital streaming platforms. We've got Spotify, Google Play, iTunes, YouTube again. Make sure you comment below, hit that like button, subscribe, and if you want to be notified of any new videos, there's a little bell next to the subscribe button. Hit that and hit all the time.
I like reading the comments. Go in and tell me that I don't know what I'm talking about, or I know what I'm talking about.
Please.
Yeah. Sounds like go and tell him he doesn't know what he's talking about.
Please. It's like, like before we wrap it up, the whole correcting us saying that it's a Tarika Plata and not an app, like it's giving us this correct name. Like, I'm pretty sure that technique is older than that Tarek is.
Tarek Hopscotch was very nice about it when we tagged him about it. But it's all cool. Go in the comments and tell us that we don't know what we're talking about. It's funny.
Yeah, please do.
Or you can tell us that we do know what we're on about, but that's only going to inflate our egos more. I'd rather hear what I don't know.
Yeah, no, true. Or that the technique's not going to work because the person not defending it properly.
Yeah, go back onto our old technique videos and tell us that you know, why don't you just like put their arm over your head to defend? Why didn't we think about that when we were doing it? Actually, that's a good point.
Like, why aren't we resisting more on an instructional video?
That's my favorite video.
That really got a bite out of me.
What was it for? It was for the
It was for turtle.
Hip control from the back, wasn't it?
No, it was for turtle, wasn't it?
Was it not when you were showing the one that we did afterwards? Because we did a video afterwards where like I decided to defend.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And I think it was the one where you were showing the hip pinch control from the back.
Yeah.
That's one of my favourite videos. That the look of confusion on your face, you're like, he's defending it. What's going on?
He's not supposed to be defending it.
No.
So if you want to know what we're talking about, go back and watch the back control videos and let us know what you think.